All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining today. It is 12:03, so I think we should get started. My name is Hannah Ibrahim, and I am a talent acquisition analyst at Slalom Consulting. So Slalom is a technology consulting firm based out of Seattle. We have a Toronto office, and we worked together with Career Edge to find some summer interns, and it was a great experience. So I thought we would have a resume writing workshop just to kind of go over what a good resume looks like, what to include, what to think about when you're writing a resume. So we'll spend the next 30 to 40 minutes or so going over that. Feel free to, we have a small group, so feel free to come off mute and ask questions if there is something that I'm going over that you want some clarification on. I have no problem with that. And we'll also leave time at the end for you to ask any questions as well. So thanks again for joining. So we'll start with what is a resume. So I'm sure most of you have created a resume or in the process of creating a resume or want to create one. So a resume is a summary of your experiences and skills, and it would be relevant to the career or the field you are trying to enter. So it's essentially a list of accomplishments, and you can kind of see it as a marketing tool for yourself. It's a collection of all your best accomplishments, your experience, your education that you want a prospective employer to see. So what's the purpose of it? The purpose of a resume is to show that you are a good candidate for the role you're applying for, right? And it's important to do this in the most efficient way possible. It's something that will motivate a recruiter or a potential employer to interview you. And one thing I would like to note here that's super important is, I can tell you as a recruiter, most employers will only spend 10 to 20 seconds looking at your resume. So how it's presented and what they see at first glance is super important. And my suggestion is, even if you have up to 5 or 6 years of experience, keeping your resume to one page is possible. You just have to be creative as to how you do it. And I guarantee you it will go a long way if you're able to keep it brief and pleasant to look at. So how to prepare to write a resume. There's 2 factors we're going to go over. The first one is to know yourself. And the second is to know the position that you're applying to really well. And I'll tell you why both of those things are very important. So the first would be to know yourself. So I think before starting a resume, and I know it's something people don't tend to look forward to, maybe I can speak for myself in saying that resume writing and cover letter writing can be very tedious. But I find it's similar to how we learn to write an essay or a report in elementary school, where we kind of have our points and write our outline and then go into resume writing. Makes things a lot easier. So you're able to outline your thoughts and really highlight what are the key factors of what you want to include, and then put it all together. So to start, know yourself and ask yourself questions like, how can I target my resume to the company I'm applying for? So I'll give you an example. If you're applying to a company, let's say that's a startup, that you know has a certain type of work culture or might be a little bit more flexible, you may tailor your resume a little bit differently than you are applying to a more traditional, let's say, financial institution, right? So that's one thing to think about when you're putting your resume together. And you want to be able to sell yourself and know what your skills are in relation to the job you're applying for. So really ask yourself what your skills are and how you can target your resume to reflect that. And then prepare an inventory of your skills, your accomplishments, your educations, your goals, any certificates or things you're proud of, and of course, your experience. The way I would think about this is it's essentially how you are going to market and sell yourself. So you may not think that your volunteer experience, for example, is relevant, but there is always a way to kind of reframe the experience you've had to be suitable for the job. And that's kind of why we're here, to go over that and highlight those things to you. It's just about reframing and selling yourself to make it suitable to the job. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, awesome. The second would be to know the position. So it's doing research and tailoring your resume to the position you're applying. So look at the job description, don't just skim over it, really look at it, see what necessary skills they're asking for, the desired qualifications, what education and work experience they're looking at, look at the company's values, and look at the job duties that would be required of you if you were to receive the job. One thing that I'd like to note that is important at this point is knowing the position and looking at the job description. Does anybody know what an ATS is? Just come off mute if you have the answer. No? Anyone? Okay, so an ATS is an applicant tracking system. And so, you know, when you go online and you apply to a job and you enter all your information into the company's website, that information is being pulled and going to an applicant tracking system on the other end. And an applicant tracking system has there are functionalities within the ATS that allows recruiters to type in certain skills or jobs. And someone who has listed that skill or job on their resume will pull into a list of 200 candidates. If I put in customer service, everybody who's and has included customer service on their resume will pull up. So it's really important at this point to look what the job is asking for and make sure you highlight that on your own resume. And this is something that recruiters will use, and it also just demonstrates how you would be relevant and align well with the job and what the job is asking for. So really think about what you want to include and what you want to highlight on your own resume. So once you've gone through those steps of thinking about your own skills and what the job is asking for, think about what type of resume you want to do. So there are quite a few different types of resumes that I'll go over. So the first one would be a reverse chronological resume. A reverse chronological resume is the most used, it's most frequently used. It's probably the one recruiters prefer. And it essentially begins with your experience working backwards, right? So it's reverse chronological order. So your most recent experience would be listed first. Then you have a functional resume. So a functional resume essentially highlights overarching skills like customer service or sales or testing and debugging, for example. And then underneath each skill, you would list your job experiences that were relevant to that skill. So it focuses on your professional skills as opposed to your work experience. We then have targeted resumes. So this would be a resume that you have created specifically for a job. So you're only highlighting relevant skills and job experience for that particular role that you're applying to. Now, this is more common in more senior level roles where there are very, very specific skills that are required. It definitely is a little bit more time consuming. If you're applying to similar types of roles, you might want this to be the type of resume you use. But again, the most common one is a reverse chronological resume. And then last, you can have a combination resume. So a combination resume could be, it could have reverse chronological at the top and then functional skills at the bottom. And it's kind of a combination of both. So it's really up to you to decide what you think you're most comfortable creating and what the industry you are trying to enter would use most. And you can gain that information by, even talking to a recruiter, if you speak to them, speaking to other people who are applying to roles within your field or someone who has a role within your field that you're trying to apply to, you will be surprised as to how nice and open and willing to help people can be. So it's just about asking and figuring out what works for your field. Any questions about that? Awesome. Again, so a reverse chronological resume, it's the most standard format that's preferred by most employers. So I'm sure most of you have seen this before. It is date oriented. So again, going from most recent to oldest job experience, and you would organize a reverse chronological resume within job titles. So you put the job title first and your experience under it. For example, if you have two jobs at the same role, you'd put your same company, you'd put your most recent role first and the one prior before that. So getting into the format of a resume. So we're going to be going kind of over what a reverse chronological, more common resume format looks like. And the kind of sections of this resume would be a heading. So that would include your name, your contact information, and two optional parts here that I would include would be an objective, a summary of qualifications, which we will go over what that means, and then your education listed and your experience. So as for the heading section, the heading is placed at the top of the page and it's aligned in the middle. Your name should be the first line and it should be bolded. And then you want to include information like your phone number, your email, and I always say to include a LinkedIn profile hyperlink. I've put in 3 icons here that I frequently see on resumes, kind of to make it more aesthetic. A lot of people put in their address. That is something that's a little bit dated now. Employers don't really need to see your address or where you live. This can also be potentially a deterrent. So if a recruiter sees that, you live, if the role is in Toronto and you live in Windsor, while they might be open to hiring remote candidates, maybe that's not their preference. So instead, I would leave out address entirely and have that conversation once the recruiter contacts you. So the most important things are how to get in touch with you, are phone number, email, and LinkedIn hyperlink. And I see a lot of resumes where candidates want to include their LinkedIn hyperlink, but they never test it out. So you end up having a broken link. Make sure that you are testing any links that you're including on your resume. For example, if you have a link to an online like a repository of your work or something you want to demonstrate that you want recruiters to see, and the link doesn't work, not a good idea. It's almost better if you hadn't included it. So make sure that you're testing those links that you're including before applying to jobs. So this would just be an example. So the name, the phone number, the email address to be reached at, and it's important that you have a professional email address that you're including. So if that means creating a whole different email address just for your job applications, do it. So next we have the objective. The objective and summary of qualifications are 2 sections that I would say leave out if you are strapped for space on your resume. So if you're trying to make it 1 page, these are not mandatory sections. And most of the time, the objective and summary of qualifications can be implied or taken from the rest of your resume if you've done a good job. But if you have space and it's something you want to include, go for it. So the objective can be, 1 to 2 really short sentences, and it's specifying the type of role you're seeking, what you you want to tailor it to the company specifically. So this is not something that you can apply to every job with. You'd have to tailor your resume accordingly. And you don't want to use generalized statements or, flowery language. You kind of, it's something that should be to the point, and you want to clearly state what your objective is. So I'll give you an example. Instead of saying to gain a position where I can be an asset to my employer and grow as an individual, that sentence isn't really saying much. It's quite clear that you want to gain a position with that employer, and you're then stating what the company can do for you, not so much what you can do for the company. You can try being more specific and saying to gain a position as a medical secretary at Trillium Medical Clinic. So it shows conciseness. You're highlighting what role you're applying for and where. And again, this would have to be something that you change with each application you do. Personally, I would leave this out. If I'm applying to similar roles, it's something that, I then have to remember to edit every time I submit my resume. And it's not quite, I would say it's not necessary. This is an optional piece. We have another optional section. So this is the summary of qualifications. And again, you only want to use this section if there's very, very specific niche job requirements that you want to highlight right at the top. You want the recruiter or the potential employer to see as soon as they look at your resume. So this can be 3 to 6 bullet points, no more than that. That would highlight, if you're, let's say, within science and you've had some research published, or there's very specific certifications, hard to get certifications that you're proud of, outstanding traits that you want to, or a specific employer that you want to highlight on your resume, feel free to do that right at the top. And you want that to be, again, the highlighted ones that you won't see or maybe aren't so obvious in the rest of your resume. Before we move on, do we have any questions?
Yeah, I do have a question.
Sure.
Is it okay to add a picture to a resume?
No, so in Canada, we don't really look at pictures on resumes. I know that this might be norm in other places. I lived elsewhere, and I went, it was in Lebanon, and I went and I wanted to find a part-time job. So I took my resume and I walked around and, classic handing out my resume, looking for a retail job. And there, people were wondering why I didn't have a picture on my resume, because that's the norm there. But in Canada, we actually shouldn't be including pictures on resumes, because it can create a bias, right? So you don't want to be putting pictures on your resumes. There are also certain features within the applicant tracking system that I mentioned earlier, where we can actually blank names and any type of images that come onto a resume to remove that type of unconscious bias. So to answer your question, don't be putting pictures on your resume.
Thank you.
No problem.
I have a question as well.
Of course.
So most of the clients that we have are refugees. So one of the questions is about putting in qualifications, and especially the work experience from back home. Mm-hmm. They ask, is that like a useful thing to put an experience that they had, or should they just leave it and just use some of the experience from Canada?
Is the experience relevant experience, or, are they applying to a...
Yeah, in most cases, it would be relevant.
Then of course, include it, for sure, include it. Some people will put in the location. So in that case, personally, I would take out the location. If that also might provide some type of unconscious bias, which you don't, why would you want to include that when you can kind of just leave it out? If the recruiter contacts the candidate and then asks about it, sure, you can say it was in X country, but I wouldn't provide that information because it's not really relevant, right?
That's right. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Anything else? No, awesome. Okay, let's move on. So getting into, we know you have your heading, you now have your objective, if you choose to include it, your summary of qualifications, and now we're at education. So this is especially important. Kind of depends on, are you a new student? Are you a new grad? Or are you, have you had 20 years of job experience, right? And your education that is a little bit more dated. For new grads, I would say put your education at the top. It's most recent, something you've just graduated, you're proud of. So I would say put education first. So you're gonna wanna list your highest level of education first. Again, you're doing the reverse chronological order. Highlight the degrees that you've earned, any designations or certifications that you've also worked towards. Again, if it's relevant, if you have space, put your major, your minor, and again, if you're applying to a finance job and you have your CFA, you definitely want to highlight that, right? So it's okay to use some bolding or italicizing. And for students, this is quite specific to students, only list your GPA if it's 3.0 or higher. It's often not something that most employers will ask for. It's called, so similar to the location. If it's not really relevant and they're not asking for it and it's not great, don't include it. Then you want to put relevant coursework. Again, this is something you only want to include if it's relevant to the job. So if you're if you're trying to switch fields and you're going from finance to HR, it's not really necessary to put all your finance courses when you're applying to a human resources job. So just be mindful of what's relevant to the job. And then again, any special licenses, credentials, certificates, exams, or training. So for example, a UCFA, again, for an example, if you haven't written all the exams, but you have still written CFA level 1, include that. It's something that's an accomplishment. You passed it. You want to include that even if you haven't done the entire process. So now the bulk of the resume is the experience. So a few tips. You want to emphasize relevant and important experience and minimize experience that may not be as important. You want to quantify your experience, expand on your skills, and then we'll go over formatting. So this is kind of the overview of what we'll be discussing for the experience section. So first, you want to think about what counts as experience. And you may not think that unpaid employment or internships or volunteer roles that you've had are relevant, but you can learn so much from those. And again, it's about reframing the experience that you have had. So if you're applying to a finance job and you were part of a campus club where you were kind of in charge of the budget, it's a way to reframe the experience you have had and don't minimize it. You want to include that and make it relevant to the role that you are applying for. And there may be, if you're new to Canada or you're a student and you haven't had so much paid experience, there's definitely ways to reframe the experience you have had to make it relevant to the role you're applying for. You just have to be creative, and it does take time, but you will get this experience by writing and rewriting resumes and having people look at your resumes and review them, and you will find a way to get creative for sure. So emphasizing versus minimizing. So this again goes back to emphasizing relevant experience and minimizing irrelevant experience. For example, if you are now applying to a marketing role, you may not want to provide your 5 years of different customer service experience unless in that customer service role, you have done some marketing and you are able to reframe it, right? It all just depends, but if you're listing simple customer service experience and it's not relevant to the role, there may be a better way to use that space on your one-page resume. So again, you want to list your accomplishments. What did you actually accomplish during your time at in the 1 year you were in this role, right? You don't want to just say what you came to work and you did. You want to say what you accomplished and highlight those things. Did you win any awards? Did you have a new idea that you implemented in that role? And it was a success, right? It's not just you came to work and you provided customer service. You want to highlight your accomplishments. And feel free to use vocabulary or keywords from your field. One thing I do see is that people will include acronyms on their resumes without qualifying the acronyms. So sometimes I'm reading a resume and I have no idea what this acronym is referring to. Might be common for them in their field, but you have to remember that a recruiter is HR, they're talent acquisition. They're often not doing the actual job or have limited technical knowledge or experience in that specific field. So for myself, I am a technical recruiter. I hire for Salesforce across Canada at Slalom. And oftentimes I speak to candidates who are Salesforce developers who are using all this jargon that I have absolutely no idea about. And I have to remind them that I myself am not a Salesforce developer. I'm a recruiter. And while I can facilitate the process, I'm not actually a technical person. And I ask them to explain. But on your resume, you want to make sure this is done because, again, a recruiter is only looking at your resume for 20, 30 seconds tops. They're just skimming it. If there's a lot of jargon on there that they don't understand, they might, put you in a separate pile. You might have a great resume and be totally skilled and able to do the job. But if the recruiter doesn't know, it might just confuse them, and they might just kind of put you in another pile, and you don't want that to happen. So just you feel free to use vocabulary, but be aware of the acronyms and who is looking at that resume. This, I think, would be the most important thing to take away from the experience section, and a lot of the time what people forget to do on their resume. So you want to quantify your experience. So this is, including numbers essentially. And I put a couple examples, and the underlined words are kind of the questions you should be asking yourself when it comes to your role. So, how many, how often, how much, how many people did you supervise if you're a manager? How often did you create these reports? What were those reports used to do? And a sales example, how much did you improve sales by, right? These numbers give the recruiter some type of quantifiable knowledge, data that they can use to compare, but also gives you some context, right? So these 3 questions are really important to include. So highlight your accomplishments, and your accomplishments can say, I improved sales, I just improved sales, or you can say, I improved sales by X dollars. There's a difference there, and I want to be sure to highlight that to you all. And then last is to expand on your skills. So again, it's important to look at the skills that the job is looking for, and then think about your own skills and find ways to tie these together on your resume. And sometimes this does mean you're applying to different roles with different job descriptions. Sometimes it means having a different resume and editing or tweaking your resume to apply to different jobs. And yes, it's time consuming, but it will pay off in the end. So, I just listed some skills that are common that you might want to include on your resume, and then tweak accordingly. Any questions? Okay. So this is something that I would like to talk about. There often are times where you see gaps on resumes, right? And that could potentially be a red flag to a recruiter or an employer. So just kind of going over how to disguise a period of unemployment. And this can mean, you took a sabbatical, or you went on parental leave, or you were taking care of a family member, or you decided to take a year off to work on, personal skills you wanted to improve, whatever it may be. There are ways to disguise the gaps on your resume. So the first tip I have is to include only years. So you don't have to put the months. So I've, provided an example here. Instead of highlighting the dates with the months, you can just put the years with the titles. And if, again, the recruiter wants to probe into that on a screen or during an interview, they will. So just take out the months, just include the years. Often looks cleaner too. And then explain the gap. So it's very common for people to take parental leave. I see it now, even people highlighting it on their LinkedIn profile. Totally fine, very normal. It's fine to include that. It's not something that you need to hide. Even, being a primary caregiver for somebody who is ill at home, feel free to include that. Employers are empathetic, and it's better to just include that as opposed to kind of trying to hide it. Any questions about this before we move on? This might be something that might be a little bit new to people. No? Awesome. All right. So you've done the bulk of the resume. You've done your education, your experience. You can add other sections if you have space, if there's something that you really want to highlight, showcase who you are outside of work. There may be organizations or groups or volunteer, or even, if you're an avid cyclist or you play professional hockey, whatever it is, that is something that you should highlight on your resume. It's also often a conversation piece. So feel free to include that in additional sections on your resume. Sometimes it can be just a little sliver at the bottom, highlighting who you are as a person. I've seen so many different things. I've seen, avid cocktail connoisseur, people write that on their resume, and it's a point of conversation. It can be really anything. If you feel that it's important to include it. I often find those the most fun part to read. And formatting. So a busy resume, again, looking at it for 20 to 30 seconds, busy resume, the good information may get lost in there. So you want to keep your formatting super simple, keep it consistent. And this is something where you might not notice. If you're looking at your resume and working on it for weeks on end, you may not notice the formatting error. So it's always good to have a couple different set of eyes on your resume before you start applying to jobs. Use simple professional fonts, so Times New Roman or Arial, whatever it is. Keep it 10 to 12 font. Even if you have, not enough job experience, don't use a size 16 font on your resume. You can rather leave empty space or find ways to fill that space productively than using a huge font, because we will notice. Keep a consistent margin all around. Again, the abbreviations piece. Again, I may not know what that means, whereas somebody in the industry will, but I'm a recruiter, so I'm not going to know. So if you're going to use abbreviations, qualify them or don't use them at all. Don't use your bold and italics and all that crazy formatting. Again, it gets too busy, and you want to only use that for pieces of information you really want to stick out to the recruiter. And the last piece is a funny one. So save your document in PDF. Sometimes people submit their resumes in Word, but it has all their markup or all someone's edits on there, and I'm able to see all of that because they haven't checked the document before they submit it to the system. And I have also received resumes where it's clear that someone has copied somebody else's resume and the document title is actually somebody else's name, or it's something inappropriate or something. So you just want to check that the document is in good shape before you start submitting your resume to employers. So just something to know. So references. So, you know, some people usually put, you know, references available upon request. That's a little bit dated. It's not really necessary. References in themselves are kind of being phased out. So you don't need to include references on your resume. Choose, you know, professional references if the recruiter asks. If you reach a stage where the recruiter or the employer is asking for references, they will ask you for them, and you can provide them at that point. And again, remember to provide professional ones, not personal. And always, as good etiquette, always ask your references to use them before they get a random call from a recruiter, unexpected, asking for a reference. So just something to also keep in mind before giving out their contact information. Any questions? Okay, so I have listed some additional resources here that I can drop into the chat as soon as we're done. These 3 sites are really good resources to look at sample resumes. Have a look, see what's trending now. For example, you may not have known the thing about references. It's just good to check in. Sometimes, you know, you apply to a job, 2 years later, you're looking for a new job. There might be something you've missed, something that's changed within resume writing that you want to address. And these are 3 good resources to do that. That was all for today. We do have 5 minutes left, so thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this was useful. And if you took one piece of information from it, that would be super great. I have offered to provide resume review and or a LinkedIn profile review. The way I recruit has changed over the years, in the sense that instead of looking at resumes in my previous role, I now really look at LinkedIn profiles. And your LinkedIn profile is a representation of essentially an online resume, right? And so I think that at this point, resumes and LinkedIn profiles kind of hold the same value, and I don't think people realize that. So if you would like a resume review or a LinkedIn profile review, you can email marketing@careeredge.ca and let Marwa know that you would like to do that, and she can put you in contact with me, and we can set up some time to do either of those. Thank you, everybody. Do we have any questions?
I do have one question.
Sure.
Just a second. Yeah. So I was wondering about things that could deter the recruiter from my resume.
Okay. Just in general?
Yeah, generally, yeah.
Okay. So I mentioned the links, the PDF, Word, saving, the titling. I think formatting is major. I think the minute I open a resume and it's busy and it's inconsistent and the formatting is everywhere and it's not clean to look at, I think that kind of deters me. I'm speaking from my own experience. I think certain things like highlighting the relevant skills. So if you have a long sentence and, you know, your skills kind of getting lost in the bullet point, maybe you can use something like bolding or italicizing to draw attention to that. And that's, again, it's almost always formatting, right? Because the information is getting lost in the resume. I also don't like looking at a new grad who has a 3-page long resume, because likely there's no way that they've had 3 pages worth of experience if they're just graduating from university. And so it's almost like it's taking too much time to get through those 3 pages, could have been condensed into 1. And another thing, it's not so much that it bothers me or deters me, it's just, it makes it almost harder. So I find that a lot of people who are bilingual, especially in Canada, bilingual in French, that is like hidden somewhere right in the bottom of their resume where it's very easy to miss. That's whatever language it is, that should be something that's highlighted right at the top. So this is when you would want to provide that summary of qualifications section that we talked about, which is optional. Being bilingual in any language, super important, something to kind of highlight. And a lot of times, if I'm not using that search feature on the applicant tracking system, that I specifically search French, I may be going through 100 resumes and it's so easy to miss. And I think this is something that like hasn't deterred me, but it's kind of almost stopped you from getting the job almost because you haven't made it noticeable on your resume. These are just some random things that come to mind. Does that answer your question?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
No problem. I think we have time for one more question if anybody does have. All right, well, I hope this was helpful in some way, shape, or form. Again, email marketing@careeredge.ca if you would like a resume review or a LinkedIn profile review. I will likely send out an invitation directly to you to set up time to do that. And again, thank you so much for joining, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Hannah.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks everyone for attending. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Hannah.